My name is Grace Williams, and for 37 years, I've been more than just the housekeeper for the Hartwell family. I've been their confidant, their second mother, and sometimes their conscience. As I adjusted my navy blue dress in the mirror at the Ritz-Carlton in Malibu, I couldn't shake the weight of the envelope hidden in my purse downstairs. The same envelope that had arrived 3 days after Mr. Richard Hartwell's funeral, containing documents that would change everything I thought I knew about my place in this family. The wedding was set for sunset on the hotel's private beach. Sophia Hartwell, the bride, had grown from the rebellious teenager who used to sneak cookies from my kitchen into a successful attorney, though her entitled attitude hadn't softened much over the years. I'd helped raise her after her mother died when she was 12, stepping in when Richard was too consumed with grief and work to be present. Now, she was marrying Marcus Chen, a tech entrepreneur whose family had made their fortune in Silicon Valley. "Grace, there you are!" Sophia's voice carried that familiar edge of impatience. She appeared wearing her $15,000 Vera Wang gown, her blonde hair perfectly styled in an elaborate updo. "I need you to check on the flower arrangements one more time. The coordinator doesn't understand that the white roses must be placed exactly as I specified." I nodded, swallowing the words I wanted to say. For 3 decades, I'd bitten my tongue when treated as help rather than family, even though Richard had always insisted I was part of their inner circle. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, the secret inheritor of an $80 million beachfront estate in the Hamptons, still being ordered around like hired help. The revelation had come as a shock even to me. Richard's private attorney, James Morrison, had explained that the mansion, a sprawling 12,000 square foot property with 300 feet of private beach, had been quietly transferred to my name 6 months before Richard's death. The documents were ironclad, witnessed and notarized, with a personal letter from Richard explaining his reasoning. "Grace has given her life to this family. She deserves security and dignity in her golden years. This is not charity. This is justice for decades of selfless service." As I walked through the hotel's marble corridors toward the beach setup, I passed the other wedding guests, politicians, business executives, and old money families from the East Coast. Their conversations buzzed with gossip about mergers, vacation homes, and private school admissions. None of them had ever looked twice at me, the black woman who'd practically raised their host's daughter. The beach setup was magnificent, white. Silk draping fluttered in the ocean breeze, and thousands of dollars worth of roses and peonies created an archway where Sophia and Marcus would exchange vows. The Pacific stretched endlessly beyond, painted in shades of gold and orange as the sun began its descent. But tonight, as I watched Sophia pledge her future to Marcus, I carry knowledge that could shatter the comfortable assumptions everyone here has about power, worth, and who deserves what in this world. The question haunting me isn't whether to reveal the truth. It's when and how that revelation might change everything for a family that's never truly seen me as equal, despite claiming otherwise. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter. The ceremony proceeded with clockwork precision, each moment choreographed to perfection. I stood at the back of the gathering, watching as Sophia glided down the petal-strewn aisle on the arm of her Uncle William, Richard's younger brother, who'd stepped in to give her away. The sight tugged at my heart. Richard should have been here, should have seen his daughter in her moment of triumph. As the officiant began the ceremony, my mind drifted to the conversation I'd had with Richard just 2 months before his sudden heart attack. We'd been sitting in his study overlooking the garden he'd loved so much, discussing Sophia's wedding plans. "Grace," he'd said, his voice unusually serious, "I need you to promise me something. Whatever happens to me, whatever anyone tells you about your place in this family, remember that you've earned every bit of respect and security you deserve." At the time, I'd thought it was just the rambling of a man facing his mortality. Now I understood it was his way of preparing me for what was coming. "Do you, Sophia Elizabeth Hartwell, take Marcus Chen to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The officiant's words carried across the beach, mixing with the sound of waves lapping against the shore. "I do," Sophia's voice rang clear and confident. "Ease?" Applause rippled through the crowd. I noticed Margaret Hartwell Stevens, Richard's sister, shooting glances in my direction. Margaret had always been the most vocal about maintaining appropriate boundaries with the help, though she'd never said it directly to my face. The reception moved to the hotel's oceanfront ballroom, where crystal chandeliers cast warm light, over tables adorned with more flowers than most people see in a lifetime. I'd been seated at a table near the kitchen, close enough to help if needed, far enough from the family table to maintain the invisible barriers that had always existed. "Grace Williams?" A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see James Morrison, Richard's attorney, approaching with a concerned expression. "Could I speak with you privately?" My stomach tightened. James was one of only 3 people who knew about the inheritance. We stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking the beach where the ceremony had taken place. "I've been getting calls," James said in a low voice, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "William Hartwell contacted my office yesterday asking about Richard's will. Specifically, he wanted to know about any unusual provisions or recent changes." The night air felt suddenly cold against my skin. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, of course. Attorney-client privilege extends beyond death. But Grace, I'm concerned. There have been questions about why the Hampton house wasn't explicitly mentioned in the public will reading. If William starts digging..." Before he could finish, we heard the sound of the ballroom doors opening behind us. Margaret Hartwell Stevens stepped onto the balcony, her ice blue dress catching the moonlight. "James, how lovely to see you here," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Grace, I didn't expect to find you chatting with family attorneys at my niece's wedding." The tension in the air was palpable. James excused himself quickly, leaving me alone with Margaret. "You know, Grace, I've been thinking about Richard's passing and how generous he was with his staff over the years. It's important that everyone understands their place, don't you think? Especially when it comes to family matters and family assets." Her words were carefully chosen, but the message was clear. "Mrs. Stevens, I've always known my place in this family." "Of course you have, dear. You've been such a faithful employee all these years. I do hope that continues. It would be such a shame if misunderstandings arose about Richard's intentions. Family wealth should stay in the family, don't you agree?" She turned and glided back into the ballroom, leaving me alone with the sound of waves and an unspoken threat. Inside, Sophia and Marcus swayed together during their first dance, surrounded by loved ones and well-wishers. But I couldn't shake Margaret's words or the growing certainty that my secret wouldn't remain hidden much longer. The wedding reception continued in full swing as I made my way back to my assigned table, Margaret's veiled threats echoing in my mind. The ballroom buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses, but I felt increasingly isolated from the celebration around me. "Grace!" Sophia appeared at my side, slightly breathless from dancing. Despite everything, seeing her genuinely happy brought a smile to my face. "I wanted to thank you for everything today. I know Daddy would have been so proud to see how perfectly everything went." For a moment, she wasn't the demanding woman who'd ordered me around earlier. She was the 12-year-old girl who'd cried in my arms after her mother's funeral, the teenager who'd confided her first heartbreak to me over midnight conversations in the kitchen. "He loved you so much, sweetheart," I said, adjusting a strand of hair that had escaped her updo. "He wanted nothing more than your happiness." "I miss him," she whispered, and I saw tears threatening to spill over her carefully applied makeup. "Sometimes I still pick up the phone to call him about something, and then I remember..." I squeezed her hand gently. "He's here with us, Sophia. In all the good values he taught you, in the way you've built your career, in the way you chose Marcus, a good man who loves you for who you are." She nodded, composing herself. "You've always been our rock, Grace. I don't know what we would..." have done without you all these years." As she returned to her guests, I felt a pang of guilt about the secret I was carrying. Richard had left me the mansion to ensure my security, but he'd also created a situation that could tear his family apart. The Hampton estate represented a significant portion of his wealth, money that his relatives undoubtedly expected to inherit. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my daughter Jasmine in Atlanta. "How's the fancy wedding, Mom? Hope you're having fun with your other family." The gentle sarcasm in her words reminded me of the conversations we'd had about my relationship with the Hartwells. Jasmine had always questioned why I devoted so much of my life to raising someone else's child when I had my own family to consider. "Mrs. Williams?" A young man in a server's uniform approached my table. "There's a phone call for you at the front desk. The caller said it was urgent." Confused, I followed him to the hotel lobby. The desk clerk handed me the phone with an apologetic expression. "Grace, it's James Morrison. I'm sorry to disturb you, but we have a problem. William Hartwell showed up at my office an hour ago with a private investigator. They're demanding access to all of Richard's financial records from the past year. I managed to turn them away, but this is escalating quickly." My heart sank. What does this mean? It means they're actively looking for something. "Grace, I think you need to seriously consider your options. If they discover the transfer before you're ready to deal with it, you could find yourself in a very difficult position." As I hung up the phone, I noticed Uncle William himself standing near the hotel bar, deep in conversation with two men I didn't recognize. One was taking notes, and their body language suggested this wasn't a social chat. They were conducting business at his niece's wedding. Near midnight, as the reception began winding down, I stepped outside for air. The beach where the ceremony had taken place was now empty, except for the cleanup crew dismantling the floral arrangements. The contrast was stark. A few hours ago, this spot had been filled with hope and celebration. Now it looked almost abandoned. Quite a transformation, isn't it? William Hartwell's voice startled me. He'd approached silently, loosening his bow tie as he walked. "The flowers were beautiful," I replied carefully. "Yes, expensive too. Richard always did go overboard when it came to Sophia." He paused, studying the ocean. "You know, Grace, I've been thinking about my brother a lot lately. He was always unconventional in his decisions. Sometimes those decisions had consequences he didn't fully consider." "Mr. Hartwell was a thoughtful man," I said. William turned to face me directly. "Thoughtful, yes, but also impulsive when it came to matters of the heart. He saw you as family, we all know that. But there's a difference between being treated like family and being family, isn't there?" The threat was less veiled than Margaret's had been. As he walked back toward the hotel, I remained on the beach, watching the waves erase the last traces of the day's celebration. The reckoning I'd been dreading was approaching faster than I'd anticipated. 3 days after the wedding, I was back in my small apartment in Santa Monica, trying to process everything that had transpired. The contrast between the opulent celebration and my modest one-bedroom home felt particularly sharp. I'd spent so many years living in the Hartwell Mansion's staff quarters that having my own space still felt surreal, even though I'd moved out 2 years ago when Richard insisted I deserved proper independence. My phone rang at 7 a.m. sharp. It was Sophia, and she sounded distressed. "Grace, I need you to come to the house right away. Something's happened, and Uncle William is asking a lot of questions about Daddy's affairs. He's been going through Daddy's study since yesterday morning." The drive to Beverly Hills felt longer than usual as my anxiety mounted. The Hartwell Mansion sat on 2 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, a testament to old California money and taste. I'd spent countless hours in every room of that house, but today it felt different, like walking into enemy territory. I found William in Richard's study, surrounded by boxes of documents and financial records. Margaret sat in one of the leather chairs, holding what looked like bank statements. They looked up when I entered, their expressions coldly calculating. "Grace, perfect timing," William said without preamble. "We've been discovering some interesting discrepancies in Richard's financial records. It seems there are some assets that weren't properly accounted for in his will." My mouth went dry, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm not sure how I can help." "With that, Mr. Hartwell?" Margaret laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Oh, but I think you can. You see, we've discovered that the Hampton house, worth approximately $80 million, was quietly transferred out of Richard's name 6 months before his death. The new owner is someone named Grace Williams. Quite a coincidence, don't?" "You think?" The moment I'd been dreading had arrived. Sophia, who'd been standing near the window, spun around with a look of complete shock. "What are you talking about? Grace, what's going on?" I looked at the 3 faces staring at me, 2 hostile, 1 confused and hurt, and made a decision that would change everything. "It's true," I said quietly. "Your father left me the Hampton house." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia's face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, hurt, anger, and finally a cold fury I'd never seen before. "You're lying," she whispered. "That house has been in our family for generations. Daddy would never—" "He would, and he did," William interrupted, his voice dripping with disgust. "Apparently, our saintly brother decided that his housekeeper deserved an $80 million gift for her years of service." "I didn't ask for it," I said, finding my voice. "I didn't even know about it until after the funeral. Richard left me a letter explaining his decision." "Where is this letter?" Margaret demanded. I pulled the folded document from my purse, my hands trembling slightly. "He wrote that he wanted to ensure I had security in my retirement. He said it was justice, not charity." Sophia snatched the letter and read it quickly, her face growing paler with each line. "How could you keep this from me? At my wedding, you stood there offering comfort and support while hiding the fact that you'd stolen my inheritance." "I didn't steal anything," I said firmly, drawing on every ounce of dignity I possessed. "Your father made this decision of his own free will." "Bullied him into it, more like," William snarled, "a dying man, grieving, vulnerable to manipulation from someone he trusted." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "I never manipulated Richard. He was like family to me." "Family?" Margaret's voice rose. "You were the help, a well-compensated employee, nothing more. The fact that Richard lost perspective in his final months doesn't change what you are." Sophia's eyes blazed with hurt and anger. 30 years, Grace. 30 years I trusted you, confided in you, loved you like a second mother. And this is how you repay that trust? By stealing what should have been mine? If you loved us, you would have told me immediately, Sophia continued bitterly. You would have refused the gift. Instead, you let me plan my wedding, let me mourn my father, all while knowing you'd taken something that belonged to our family. Margaret stood up, her posture radiating cold determination. "This won't stand. We're going to contest this transfer. We'll prove it was made under duress or undue influence. No court will allow a housekeeper to steal $80 million from a grieving family." As I looked around the room, at the family photos, the books I'd dusted thousands of times, the memories embedded in every corner, I realized that 30 years of love and loyalty had been reduced to a transaction in their eyes. The battle lines were drawn, and I was about to learn just how ruthless a family could be when their privilege was threatened. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the next chapter. Will Grace fight for what Richard intended? Or will the family succeed in taking away her unexpected inheritance? The legal battle began swiftly and brutally. Within a week of the confrontation in Richard's study, the Hartwell family had hired Preston and Associates, one of Beverly Hills' most prestigious law firms, to contest the property transfer. Their strategy became clear immediately. Paint me as a manipulative opportunist who had taken advantage of a grieving widower. I sat in James Morrison's modest downtown office, a far cry from the marble and mahogany of Preston and Associates, as he explained what we were facing. "They're alleging undue influence, mental incapacity, and fraud," James said, his usually calm demeanor showing strain. "They've hired a forensic accountant to examine every financial interaction you've had with Richard over the past 5 years. They're looking for anything that could suggest you manipulated him." "What does that mean for me?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "It means they're going to scrutinize everything. Every gift Richard gave you, every bonus, every time he paid for your daughter's college expenses or your mother's medical bills. They'll try to paint a pattern of financial manipulation." My heart sank. Richard's generosity over the years had been genuine, helping with Jasmine's tuition when I couldn't afford Stanford, covering my mother's cancer treatments, ensuring I had proper health care. Now those acts of kindness would be weaponized against E. The media attention started the following week. Someone, probably the Hartwell's PR team, had leaked the story to the gossip blogs. The headlines were predictably sensational. "Housekeeper inherits 80M mansion, family cries foul," and from "Maid to millionaire, the Beverly Hills inheritance scandal." The racist undertones were barely concealed. Comments on news articles called me everything from a gold digger to worse. Some suggested I'd used voodoo or other stereotypes to influence Richard. The narrative being crafted was clear: the scheming black woman who'd manipulated a vulnerable white family. "Grace, you need to see this," Jasmine called from Atlanta, her voice tight with anger. "There's a photo of you from Sophia's wedding on TMZ with the headline, 'Housekeeper Hides. 80M secret at boss's daughter's wedding.' The comments are disgusting." I'd been dreading my daughter's reaction to all this. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest," Jasmine continued. "Did you know about this inheritance before the wedding?" "Yes," I admitted quietly. "I found out a few days after the funeral." "And you didn't tell me? You didn't tell anyone?" "Mom, why would you carry that burden alone?" "Because I knew this would happen," I said. "I knew they'd react this way, that it would destroy any relationship I had left with Sophia. I was hoping maybe there was a way to handle it quietly, to not cause this kind of chaos. By staying silent and letting them treat you like the help at the wedding? Mom, you own an $80 million house and you're still letting these people talk down to you." The deposition took place in a sterile conference room downtown. Across from me sat the Hartwell's legal team, 3 attorneys in $1,000 suits, ready to dissect 30 years of my life. William and Margaret were there too, watching with cold satisfaction as their lawyers prepared to destroy me. "Mrs. Williams," the lead attorney began, "isn't it true that you frequently accepted expensive gifts from Mr. Hartwell over the years?" "He was generous," I replied carefully. "Generous to the tune of over $300,000 in the past 5 years alone. Medical bills, educational expenses, bonuses well beyond your salary. Quite generous for a housekeeper, wouldn't you say?" The implication was clear. They were suggesting I'd been grooming Richard for years, accepting increasingly expensive gifts as part of a long-term con. "How many times did you encourage Mr. Hartwell to update his will?" another attorney asked. "Never." "I didn't know about the house until after his death." "But you were aware he'd made provisions for your financial security?" This was the trap. If I said yes, it suggested I'd influenced him. If I said no, they'd call me a liar based on the documented gifts. "Richard often said he wanted to take care of the people who'd been loyal to him," I answered carefully. "People? Like family, you mean?" "I was part of his family," I said, and immediately regretted it. William leaned forward with a triumphant expression. "Part of the family. Mrs. Williams, you were an employee, a well-treated employee, but an employee nonetheless. The fact that you believed yourself entitled to family-level inheritance shows exactly the kind of delusion we're dealing with." After 4 hours of hostile questioning, I left the deposition feeling emotionally battered. That evening, I drove To the Hampton house for the first time since learning I owned it. The massive estate sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, its Spanish colonial architecture silhouetted against the sunset. Standing in the master bedroom where Richard had spent his final months, I found myself questioning everything. Had I been naive to think I could bridge the gap between servant and family? But then I remembered the letter he'd left me, his careful explanation of why he'd made this decision. This wasn't about me overreaching. This was about a system that couldn't accept that someone they'd always seen as less than could be worthy of such generosity. 2 months into the legal battle, I was drowning in legal fees and emotional exhaustion. The Hartwells' high-powered attorneys were wearing me down with constant depositions, document requests, and media leaks. Each day brought new headlines portraying me as everything from a con artist to something much worse. Then, unexpectedly, I received a phone call that changed everything. "Mrs. Williams, this is Marcus Chen, Sophia's husband. Could we meet somewhere private? I have something important to discuss." We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in Culver City, far from Beverly Hills and the prying eyes of gossip columnists. Marcus arrived looking exhausted, his usual confidence replaced by obvious distress. "I need to apologize," he said without preamble. "What my wife and her family are doing to you is wrong, and I can't stay silent anymore." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. "Why are you here, Marcus? This could destroy your marriage." "Because I've seen the real documents," he said quietly. "Sophia showed me everything, the letters, the financial records, even the recordings." "Recordings?" Marcus's expression darkened. "William has been recording his conversations with the legal team. Sophia played one for me last night, thinking it would convince me you were guilty. Instead, it proved the opposite." He pulled out his phone and played an audio file. William's voice came through clearly. "I don't care if the transfer was legal. The optics are terrible. A black housekeeper inheriting $80 million while the family gets nothing from that property. We can't let this stand, regardless of what Richard actually wanted." My hands shook as I listened to the recording. William wasn't questioning the legality of the transfer. He was admitting it was valid while declaring his intention to overturn it anyway. "There's more," Marcus continued. "They've been pressuring witnesses, offering financial incentives to former staff members who might testify that you manipulated Richard. They're not seeking justice. They're orchestrating a character assassination." "Why are you telling me this? You could lose everything." Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. "My grandparents came to America from China with nothing. They worked as domestic help for wealthy families in San Francisco, saved every penny, and eventually bought a small restaurant. I grew up hearing stories about how those families treated them, kindly to their faces, but always making it clear they weren't equals." He looked up at me. "When I met Sophia, I thought her family was different. Richard always spoke about you, with genuine affection and respect. But this lawsuit has shown me who they really are when their privilege is threatened. What about Sophia? Does she know you're here?" "Sophia is..." Marcus struggled with the words. "She's been consumed by grief and anger. She genuinely believes you manipulated her father, but that's because she can't accept that he might have loved you enough to provide for your security. In her worldview, that kind of generosity crosses boundaries that shouldn't be crossed." Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "These are copies of all the documents William has been hiding from the public record. Bank statements showing Richard's mental competency evaluations right up until his death, character references he wrote for you, even a video message he recorded explaining his decision about the house." I stared at the folder, hardly daring to believe it. "Marcus, if they find out you gave me this, let them. I'm tired of being complicit in this destruction of an innocent woman's life." His voice was firm. "Richard was my father-in-law and I respected him. This is what he would have wanted." That afternoon, James Morrison reviewed the documents with barely contained excitement. "Grace, this changes everything. The video message alone proves Richard's mental clarity and voluntary intent. They've been claiming he was compromised by grief and medication, but this shows him lucid and determined just weeks before his death. In the video, Richard sat in his study, looking directly into the camera with clear eyes and steady voice. "I'm making this recording to ensure my intentions regarding Grace Williams are completely clear. She has been more than an employee to this family. She has been a mother figure to Sophia, a trusted confidant to me, and a source of strength during the darkest periods of our lives." The Hampton House represents security and dignity for a woman who has earned both through decades of selfless service. This is not charity, this is justice. As we prepared our counteroffensive, I received another unexpected call. This time, it was Elena Rodriguez, the Hartwell's former maid who had worked alongside me for 15 years before retiring. "Grace, I've been following the news, and I can't stay silent anymore," Elena said. "Mr. Williams' people contacted me, offering money to say bad things about you and Mr. Richard. When I refused, they threatened to have my immigration status investigated." "Elena, you don't have to get involved in this." "Yes, I do. You were always good to me, and Mr. Richard was a decent man who treated us with respect. These people want to rewrite history, but I won't let them destroy your reputation with lies." Word spread through the network of former Hartwell employees, and one by one, they began reaching out. Carlos, the groundskeeper who'd worked there for 23 years. Maria, the cook who'd prepared thousands of family meals. James, the driver who'd seen the family's private moments. They all told the same story. Richard had been mentally sharp until the end, had always spoken respectfully about me, and had frequently expressed concern about my financial security. The Hartwells had expected to face a lone black woman with limited resources. Instead, they found themselves confronting a diverse coalition of workers who had witnessed the family's true dynamics for decades, but I knew this victory would come at a cost. By accepting Marcus's help and organizing the staff's testimony, I was escalating the conflict beyond what any family relationship could survive. Win or lose, there would be no going back to the way things were. This battle had evolved into something larger than a property dispute. It had become a referendum on worth, dignity, and whether decades of faithful service could earn someone the right to be treated as family, truly and completely. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Will Grace's new evidence be enough to expose the family's true motivations, or will they find new ways to attack her credibility? The courtroom was packed on the day of the final hearing. Media attention had transformed what should have been a private family matter into a public spectacle about race, class, and justice in America. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to James Morrison, trying to project confidence while my stomach churned with nervousness. Across the aisle, the Hartwell family sat with their team of high-powered attorneys. Sophia wouldn't meet my eyes, but I could see the pain and confusion in her posture. William and Margaret appeared supremely confident, whispering with their lawyers as if victory was assured. Judge Patricia Nakamura called the court to order. This case involves the contested transfer of real property valued at approximately $80 million. The defendants claim undue influence, mental incapacity, and fraud in the transfer from Richard Hartwell to Grace Williams. The Hartwells' lead attorney, Jonathan Preston, stood to make his opening statement. "Your Honor, this case represents a textbook example of elder abuse. A trusted employee systematically manipulated a grieving widower, isolating him from family and gradually securing increasingly valuable gifts, culminating in the theft of a property that had been in the Hartwell family for 3 generations. His presentation was slick and persuasive, painting me as a calculating predator who had exploited Richard's emotional vulnerability. He presented a timeline of gifts and financial assistance over the years, arguing it showed a pattern of manipulation designed to groom Richard for this ultimate betrayal of his family's trust. When James Morrison rose to respond, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Your Honor, this case is not about elder abuse. It's about a family's inability to accept that their patriarch chose to honor a woman who had devoted her life to their well-being. The evidence will show that Richard Hartwell was mentally competent, acting voluntarily, and making a decision based on decades of faithful service and genuine affection. James's opening was powerful, but I knew the real battle would be in the evidence and testimony. Preston called his first witness, Dr. Samuel Hoffman, a psychiatrist who claimed that Richard had been suffering from depression-induced mental impairment in his final months. Dr. Hoffman had never actually examined Richard, but testified that medical records showed prescription medications that could affect judgment. In my professional opinion, Dr. Hoffman stated, a man in Mr. Hartwell's mental state would have been susceptible to manipulation from someone in a position of trust and authority within his household. The implication was clear. I had used my position to take advantage of a vulnerable man. During cross-examination, James methodically dismantled Dr. Hoffman's testimony. Doctor, you never met Richard Hartwell, correct? That's correct. You never observed his mental state firsthand? No. And your opinion is based solely on a review of prescription records provided by the family? Yes. Doctor, are you familiar with the concept of competency evaluations performed by physicians who actually examine their patients? James then introduced Richard's actual medical records, including mental competency evaluations performed by his primary physician just weeks before his death. All showed him to be mentally sharp and capable of making complex decisions. The Hartwell's case began to unravel further when James called Marcus Chen to the stand. Despite furious objections from Preston, Marcus testified about the recordings he'd heard and the family's coordinated effort to discredit me, regardless of the legal validity of the property transfer. Mr. Chen, James asked, did you hear William Hartwell make any statements about the true nature of this legal challenge? Yes. I heard him say they couldn't let a black housekeeper inherit $80 million, regardless of what Richard actually wanted. He said the optics were terrible, and they had to overturn it. The courtroom erupted. Preston's objections were sustained, but the damage was done. The jury had heard the racist motivation behind the lawsuit. The most powerful moment came when James played Richard's video message. The courtroom fell silent as Richard's voice filled the room, calm and determined, explaining his decision to leave me the Hampton house. Grace Williams has been more than an employee, Richard's recorded voice stated. She raised my daughter when I was too consumed with grief to be present. She managed our household, our lives, our crises with unwavering loyalty and competence. She deserves security and dignity, and this gift represents my gratitude for a lifetime of service that went far beyond any job description. I watched the jury's faces as they listened. Several were visibly moved, particularly the women who seemed to understand the reality of domestic work and caregiving. When I finally took the stand, I felt the weight of 30 years of memories, struggles, and unspoken truths. Mrs. Williams, James asked, did you ever ask Richard Hartwell to leave you the Hampton property? Never. I didn't even know he'd done it until after his funeral. Did you ever manipulate or pressure him regarding his will or financial decisions? No. I rarely discussed money with Richard, except when he insisted on helping with my family's expenses. Those were his decisions, his generosity, not something I sought or expected. During Preston's cross-examination, he tried to paint me as calculating and manipulative, but his attack felt increasingly desperate as I calmly answered each accusation. Mrs. Williams, isn't it true that you encouraged Mr. Hartwell's dependence on you by isolating him from family members? No, I encouraged his relationships with his family. I organized family dinners, reminded him of birthdays and anniversaries, and tried to bridge gaps when conflicts arose. But you benefited financially from his isolation, didn't you? I benefited from his kindness, just as his family did. The difference is that I earned it through service, while they expected it through birth. The courtroom buzzed at my response. When Elena Rodriguez, Carlos Martinez, and other former staff members testified about Richard's mental clarity and positive statements about me, the Hartwells' narrative completely collapsed. Witness after witness described a competent, caring man who had frequently expressed gratitude for my service and concern for my future. In his closing argument, James Morrison addressed the real heart of the case. This lawsuit isn't about protecting a vulnerable elder from exploitation. It's about a family's shock that someone they'd always seen as the help could be valued, enough to receive a gift they believed was rightfully theirs. Richard Hartwell's crime, in their eyes, was treating Grace Williams as family indeed, not just in words. As I waited for the jury's decision, I realized that regardless of the outcome, this battle had forced America to confront uncomfortable truths about race, class, and who we choose to value in our society. The jury returned after 3 hours of deliberation. Judge Nakamura asked for their verdict. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Grace Williams. The property transfer was legally valid and made by a competent individual acting of his own free will. I had won. But as I looked across the courtroom at Sophia's tear-stained face and the Hartwells' stunned expressions, I wondered if justice always had to come at such a painful cost. Like and subscribe for the final chapter. How will Grace handle her victory? And can any relationships be salvaged from this bitter legal battle? 6 months after the court victory, I stood on the deck of the Hampton House watching the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean. The legal battle was over, but the emotional aftermath continued to ripple through my life in unexpected ways. The house had been empty since Richard's death, and walking through its rooms still felt surreal. This wasn't just an $80 million property. It was a 13-bedroom mansion with a library containing first-edition novels, an art collection, worth millions, and 300 feet of private beach. My daughter Jasmine arrived from Atlanta for a long overdue visit, her reaction to the house ranging from awe to sharp questions about my plans. "Mom, this place is incredible, but it's also intimidating as hell," she said as we sat in the sunroom overlooking the ocean. "Are you actually going to live here? What's your plan for this massive responsibility?" "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Sometimes I feel like I'm trespassing in someone else's life. The property taxes alone are more than my former annual salary. The maintenance costs are staggering. But it's your life now. Dad made sure of that." Jasmine had started referring to Richard as Dad after the trial, recognizing what he'd meant to our family. "The question is, what do you want to do with this incredible gift he left you?" That question had been haunting me for months. Selling the property felt like betraying Richard's intentions, but keeping it seemed to validate every accusation the foy Hartwells had made about me being out of my depth. My phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source. "Grace, this is Marcus. Sophia and I are in New York for the week. Could we visit? There are things that need to be said, wounds that need healing." I hadn't spoken to Sophia since the trial. The media attention had eventually faded, but the personal cost had been devastating. The woman I'd helped raise, who I'd genuinely loved as a daughter, had become a stranger consumed by anger and betrayal. They arrived the next afternoon, driving up the long circular driveway in a rental car. Sophia looked fragile, her usual confidence replaced by obvious discomfort. Marcus seemed nervous, but determined as they approached the front door. "Thank you for seeing us," he said, as I led them into the living room where Richard had spent countless hours reading. "I know this is difficult for everyone involved." We sat surrounded by family photos on the mantel, pictures that included me at various celebrations and holidays over the years, a visual reminder of the complex relationship we'd all shared. "I owe you an apology," Sophia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for the lawsuit, but for how I treated you afterward. I was so angry, so hurt, that I couldn't see past my own pain to understand what was really happening." "I understand why you were hurt," I replied carefully. Learning about the inheritance the way you did must have felt like a betrayal of everything we'd built together." "It did. But not because of the money," she continued, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "It was because I realized Daddy had a relationship with you that I never fully understood or accepted. He saw you as family, really and truly, and I couldn't accept that someone outside our bloodline could matter that much to him." The honesty in her words was painful, but necessary for any hope of healing. "For 30 years, I watched you care for our family," Sophia continued, her voice growing stronger. "You were there for every crisis, every celebration, every ordinary Tuesday when I needed someone to listen. But I always maintained this invisible barrier in my mind that kept you as the help, even when my heart knew better." Marcus reached for his wife's hand, offering silent support. The trial forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about privilege and prejudice. We heard testimony from people who worked for the family, and their stories showed us perspectives we'd never considered. "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely curious about their change of heart. "They talked about watching you work 18-hour days when Mom was sick," Sophia said, referring to Richard's late wife. "They described you sleeping in my room when I had pneumonia at age 14, staying up all night to make sure I was okay. They talked about how you managed every detail of Daddy's life while never asking for anything in return." She paused, struggling with emotion. Elena Rodriguez testified that she'd heard Daddy tell you he loved you like a daughter. She said you cried and told him you felt the same way about him and me. I never knew about that conversation, but it explained so much about why he made his decision. I remembered that moment clearly. Richard had been particularly reflective after a health scare, talking about family and legacy. When he'd expressed his paternal feelings toward me, I'd been overwhelmed by emotions I'd kept carefully controlled for decades. "I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately," Sophia continued. "I know I said terrible things, believed terrible things about you during the worst period of this whole ordeal. But I want to try to repair what we had, if that's even possible, after everything that's happened." "What about William and Margaret?" I asked, knowing their attitudes would affect any potential reconciliation. Marcus's expression darkened. "They've doubled down on their resentment. William is actually considering running for city council on a platform that includes protecting family assets and traditional values. They're using this situation to fuel their political ambitions, rather than learning from it." "But we're not them," Sophia said firmly. "I'm trying to be better than the person I was during the trial, to grow from this painful experience." Over the next 3 days, we talked more honestly than we had in years. Sophia shared her struggles with feeling abandoned after her mother's death, how she'd sometimes resented the attention Richard gave me, and her fear that accepting me as true family somehow diminished her own place in his heart. I shared my own struggles with belonging, how I'd loved them genuinely while always feeling like an outsider, how Richard's generosity over the years had sometimes made me uncomfortable because it highlighted the class differences between us, and how the inheritance had forced me to confront deep questions about my own worth and place in the world. By the end of their visit, we'd reached an understanding that felt fragile but genuinely real. Sophia hugged me at the door, and for the first time in months, it felt like the embrace between a mother and daughter. "What are you going to do with all this?" she asked, gesturing at the magnificent house around us. I'd been giving that question serious thought during their visit. "I'm going to turn part of it into a scholarship foundation for children of domestic workers. Richard always believed in education and opportunity. This feels like the right way to honor his memory while helping others achieve their dreams." Sophia's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "He would absolutely love that idea. Could I help with the foundation? I have legal expertise that might be useful, and I'd like to contribute something positive to this legacy." "I'd like that very much," I said, and meant it completely. The Grace Williams Foundation for Educational Excellence was established 6 months later, providing college scholarships for children of domestic workers across the country. The Hampton House became its headquarters, its grand rooms filled with the sounds of planning sessions, scholarship interviews, and young people discovering that their dreams were valid and achievable. Richard had given me more than property. He'd given me the power to change lives and create opportunities for others. In doing so, he'd proven that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by the love, loyalty, and care we choose to share with others. Sometimes justice arrives not as punishment for the guilty, but as recognition for those who have always been worthy of dignity and respect. This was my justice, and I was finally ready to embrace it completely, using it to build something beautiful for future generations. Thank you for following Grace's incredible journey. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories of courage, justice, and unexpected triumphs. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Grace's story and how you would have handled her situation.